Welcome to the video. Now we have chapter 2 called Compulsion 2. So it has been stated that flammable material exists on the inside of every human being. For example, the righteous use of sex could be perverted into grossness. A desire for perfection could turn one into a tyrant. And the desire for property as the extension of oneself into a miser. The stages by which one advances into compulsion are, first, the consent of the will to any temptation. Next, the act which is the result of the temptation. And finally, the habit itself. It takes many acts to make a habit, as it takes many strands of flax to make a rope. So habits are good as well as bad. So how weary our brain would be if we had to relearn playing the piano each time we sat down to it, or if we had to go through the laborious process of learning to write when we composed a letter. In the case of evil habits, such as alcoholism, the energy which once went into the will to prevent an excess now goes into the habit itself to enforce it. Conscience, which at first registered a protest against an evil action, such as hurting a neighbor, becomes dulled from abuse. It is very much like the spring on a screen door during the summertime. It loses its resiliency and ability to close to keep out flies. Good acts make virtue easier, and evil acts make vice easier. The hedge broken down is easier to get through. The drops of water flowing through a dike can eventually end in a flood. How habits eventually lead to compulsion may be illustrated by the parable of the trees of the forest, who had a solemn parliament in which they decided to enact some laws against the wrongs which the axe had done them. They finally agreed that no tree would lend wood as a handle for an axe, under the pain of being outlawed by the other trees. The axe without a handle raveled up and down the forest and begged for wood from cedar, ash, oak, and elm, but no one would lend him a chip. At last, he went to the briars near the trunks of the trees and said to the trees that these shrubs were sucking away the chemicals of the soil and were also obscuring the glory of the fair trees. The trees agreed to give him a handle to cut down the shrubs, but when the axe got the handle, he cut the trees down also. When a strong man has a palace that is well defended, he can keep his goods in peace. But when one stronger than he attacks the palace, then he loses his goods and also his liberty. In like manner, there eventually comes to some habitual practice of vice, which is known as compulsion. Within the course of one evening, 2 young mothers in an eastern city were assaulted by a man who broke down the front door saying, "I am a compulsive sex maniac." There are 5 million alcoholics in the United States, most of whom would say, "I can't help it. I'm a compulsive drinker. The sight of alcohol triggers me and I have no power to resist." It is at this point that psychiatrists and social workers and others say with some degree of justice that such people are sick. Indeed, they are sick, but they are not sick in the same way as a person with cancer who never willed that the cancer virus should enter his body, or that it should be multiplied within his body as a kind of a habit. But all who suffer from a so-called compulsion have entered into this state as a result of successive reacts, until a point was reached where, as a great Russian writer has said, unlimited freedom leads to unlimited tyranny. What must be stressed is that no human will is ever completely ruined by a force on the outside. It can, like a muscle, be cut successfully by a knife until the limb drops helpless. What is strange about the compulsion is that although the pleasure attached to the indulgence lessens with each successive indulgence, the power of compulsion increases. The energy that once went into the enjoyment now goes into forging new links in a chain, which can be broken only with the greatest difficulty.